Now, the United States, Britain and France are leading calls for an immediate ceasefire in the Syrian city of Aleppo to allow aid to reach the besieged population. Earlier, rebels in eastern Aleppo asked for a 5-day humanitarian ceasefire to allow civilians and injured fighters to leave. It's after regime forces made significant advances into the rebel-held areas. The Syrian Observatory for Human Rights says the regime has seized all of the old city. Meanwhile, Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov is scheduled to meet his US counterpart John Kerry in the German city of Hamburg to discuss rebel withdrawal. Well, let's take a look at where things stand in Aleppo at the moment. Regime forces have captured more than 70% of opposition-controlled areas in the eastern part of the city. Over the last 2 weeks, the rebels have lost this territory shaded in dark red. The areas in green here are where rebel fighters remain.
Aleppo Leadership Council has released a humanitarian initiative signed by all civil councils and military leaders calling for an immediate 5-day ceasefire in eastern Aleppo. It's for an urgent evacuation of 500 wounded rebel fighters from the city and also to establish safe corridors under the United Nations supervision for civilians who are trapped in eastern Aleppo. The document was addressed to the UN directly, not to the Russian or Syrian regime. This humanitarian initiative doesn't mean we decided to withdraw from eastern Aleppo. We are facing one of the heaviest attacks since years that targeting the people. We lost several neighborhoods, but this doesn't mean we lost the battle. We have already decided that we won't withdraw and we will keep fighting.
Well, TRT World's Sandra Gathmann is following developments in Aleppo from near the Turkish-Syrian border.
The proposal for the 5-day ceasefire came from Aleppo's Leadership Council. This is a joint military and civil command that operates within eastern Aleppo, and it includes all rebel groups in the city. Now, what they're asking for is for that 5-day pause in fighting to allow the evacuation of civilians towards the northeast countryside, as well as the evacuation of 500 of their injured fighters. And they want the UN to oversee that process. They're also talking about negotiating the future of Aleppo and are opening themselves up to discussing how the city is going to organize itself and reconstruct. Now, in the meantime, we are waiting on an official response from the Syrian regime or its allies. No word yet, but it's very telling that this proposal has come at a time when the opposition have seen huge losses and very rapid advances made by Syrian forces on the ground. They've now taken as much as 70% of former rebel-held territory. The big question now is if this 5-day ceasefire is something that the Syrian government is willing to accept. Will the rebels be willing to fully withdraw, which is what the Syrian regime and the Russians have been calling for?
Julia Lyubova is in Moscow with more on the Russian government's tougher tone over Syria.
Well, Moscow says that the deal to allow rebels to exit eastern Aleppo is still on. Earlier, we heard from the Kremlin's spokesman, Dmitry Peskov, who said that very few rebels have actually left Aleppo and that the majority of them are still in the city. Moscow says that all rebels who are left behind in eastern Aleppo will be treated by Moscow as terrorists. And Moscow says that it will now support the Syrian government's offensive against them. This comes as Russia's Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov was due to meet U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry on Wednesday in Hamburg. However, we heard from the Kremlin spokesman who said that talks between Russia and the U.S. are still very much on the agenda. However, it is only the U.S. and Russian experts that are in contact with each other over the situation in Aleppo at the moment. And Peskov said that he wasn't aware of any talks at a higher level happening anytime soon. But this all comes as after Russia's Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov accused Washington of backtracking on talks on the withdrawal of rebels from eastern Aleppo. Lavrov said that the U.S. was trying to buy time for the rebels. However, U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry rejected the suggestions that the U.S. was stalling these talks.